As we all know, 2K has always been broken. So broken that we couldn't even fit all the cheese in one video. From snatchbacks to pushing to spamming L2, unstoppable 7-4 builds, and oh yeah, 25-foot giants in 2K11. 2K's had so much cheese over the years that one video wasn't even close to enough. And in this video, we're picking up right where we left off in part 1 because there's still so much more cheese that still gave us unforgettable memories. This is the history of 2K Cheese Volume 2. Cheese! And to start things off, we're going all the way back to 2K11. A game that was way ahead of its time, loved by almost everyone, but it still had some of the most annoying and wildest cheese we've ever seen in a 2K game. The real cheese this year that you saw in almost every game was the hop step cheese, because this animation let you slide right through traffic like the defense wasn't even there. You'd hop into two defenders and just glide right past them for a free layup, or you'd hop right into the paint, catch the defender jumping, so either way you were scoring. But the craziest part, that wasn't even the worst cheese this year. That, without a doubt, would be the modded players, because almost every game you were playing with or against modded players, and most people would use 7-11 builds because if they were any taller and you accidentally dunked the ball, the player would straight up disappear and then the game would crash for everyone in the lobby. But that wasn't even the worst part, because you also had ridiculous mods like a 25-foot SpongeBob SquarePants, and if you matched up against him, the game was basically unplayable because you couldn't even shoot a jumper without it hitting his lower body and then being a goaltender or block. 2K11 was still one of the greatest 2Ks ever made and way ahead of its time, but there's no question it was still very full of cheese. And when we get to 2K12, it definitely still had some cheese, but it was nowhere near as wild as 2K11. The main cheese this year was the spin dunk, and it was unstoppable, and the animation dragged you straight into a wide open dunk, and nobody could block you. And part of that was the fact that you couldn't even block dunks until 2K14. But another cheese that also became popular this year, that was the shot clock cheese, and a big reason for that was the legendary crisp move. CPUs would waste the entire shot clock and then throw up some crazy hop, fade, or spin jumper, and it would go in almost every time. And every time it did go in, because of Chris' move, he had everybody saying shot clock cheese. That being said, 2K12 was an okay game, but between the unblockable dunks, spin dunk spam, and the rise of shot clock cheese, this is when people really started to see just how cheese 2K really was.
That's not cheese, but you guys can think whatever you want.
In part 1, we already covered the main cheese of 2K13, and that was the Eurostep 3, which was definitely one of the most broken shots in 2K history. But there was one more cheese that we didn't mention. This year, speed and rim running was really cheese, and players who had a high speed rating like Derrick Rose, John Wall, or Monte Ellis were an absolute nightmare to guard. If they got a running start, especially on a fast breaker off an inbound pass, you might as well put the controller down because they're dunking on you. And even if you tried to block their dunk, you couldn't, because like I said, you couldn't even block dunks in this game. So once they got the animation, it was already over. And that alone is enough cheese to drive someone crazy. 2K13 didn't have a ton of different cheese, but the cheese that it did have was some of the most iconic in 2K history.
Man, you look sick. Not bad, huh? Soak it in, playboy.
Next up, we have 2K14, and overall it was a pretty good game, but like many others, it also had some of the most annoying cheese we've ever seen, and one of the biggest ones was on the twos court. For some reason, you didn't even need to pass the ball in on the inbound, so if you had a high 3-point rating, you could just catch the ball and instantly shoot it, before the defense even had time to react. And the worst part, the twos court was make it take it, so if you made every shot, the other team never even touched the ball. So every twos game, most people would just shoot off the inbound every single time, making the twos court even more cheese than it already was. And another cheese this year was the charge cheese. If you had the charge card's signature skill, you could just hold B to take a charge, and even if your feet weren't set or you completely flopped, the game would still call it a charge and you'd get the ball. It was frustrating, it was ridiculous, and it was 100% pure 2K cheese.
Look at that cheese!
And then we have 2K15. And in 2K, we know screens have always been cheese. But in 2K15, that's where they started to become unbearable. Because if you had brick wall, you weren't just setting screens, you were sending people flying. So the defenders would get stuck, sucked into the screen, or just fall over. Almost every single time. And because 2K15 had some of the cheesiest dribble moves we've ever seen, the fact that you had to fight through a screen while guarding those animations was just honestly even more cheese. And 2K15 didn't stop there, because my team had a ton of cheese as well. And probably the biggest one this year was the 63 fist my team play. It was in the Heat playbook, and it got you a wide open 3 almost every time. That was simply because the CPU couldn't react to the play correctly, and they'd leave their man wide open, and if they didn't, the paint was wide open for you to take a layup. And it was easily one of the most frustrating things we ever had to deal with in my team. And since we're already talking about my team, we can't forget the timeout cheese this year. If you were losing and time was running out, you could call all your timeouts, and when you ran out of timeouts, you would just get technical foul after technical foul, and the game would never kick you. So your opponent would just be stuck there shooting endless free throws, just completely wasting everyone's time, and hoping the dude shooting free throws would eventually quit. And as you see, this guy stayed in the game for 3 hours, refusing to quit, and scored over 800 points just from shooting free throws. 2K15 was still a lot of fun, but it definitely had some of the worst cheese that we've ever ever seen. And 2K's had a lot of good games that were full of cheese, and another good example of that is 2K16. And one of the cheesiest things this year was the Steph Curry layup glitch. People figured out if you equipped Steph Curry's layup package and spammed X at the right moment while going up for a layup, the ball would just launch straight up out of the camera view, literally go off the screen, probably touch the clouds, and then drop straight back down and still go in. It was both mind-blowing and hilarious just because of how insane it was, and you were honestly left speechless the first time you saw this. And it was unblockable, making it absolutely cheese. And we covered the dribbling cheese in part 1, but one thing we didn't cover was the 21 court, because although the 21 court was very fun, it was also full of cheese. And one of the worst things on this court was when people would steal the inbound. The moment someone checked up the ball, you could run right in front of the guy getting the ball, spam X, and your player would just steal the possession. But the 21 court didn't stop there, because another cheesy thing you could do was spam X before shooting on the inbound, or while you were shooting for ball, because if you spammed X, your player would just keep pump faking and at the same time sliding toward the rim. So eventually you'd be able to take a much easier shot. It looked stupid, it felt stupid, and there was nothing you could do but watch. And instead of fixing these issues, unfortunately 2K just removed the court entirely, which in my opinion is still one of the most disappointing decisions that they've ever made. 2K16 was obviously still one of the best 2Ks ever made, but it was also one of the cheesiest years ever.
You know what? We've listened to the community, and it is time, Ronnie 2K, to cut that cheese right in half.
Are you sure about that?
And then there was 2K17. In part 1, we covered most of the cheese for 2K17, but there was a couple things we didn't mention. One thing was the Jamal Crawford behind the back, because this year almost every guard had this animation on, and they would spam it all the time because it was so cheesy. You'd slide side to side and can easily run past your defender, so it didn't matter how good your defense was, the Jamal Crawford behind the back move created instant space. But the other thing that made 2K17 even more cheese, that was the park badges. Some of them took a while to unlock, like Bone Collector, where you needed to break over 100 ankles in the park just to get it. But once you did finally get it, it was insanely cheese, because in the park you'd get so many more ankle breakers. And like I said, with a big setting screens on top of all of this, you might just rage quit before the game even ends, because stopping that combo was almost impossible. And whether you think 2K17 was a great game or not, one thing's for sure, this game was full of cheese.
That's what you call
cheese. And then when we talk about 2K18, the game was not only horrible, this game had its own type of cheese. One of the biggest problems this year was the snatchback. If someone had the ball and flicked their stick back, your defender would slide across the court. It didn't matter how good your defense was, the snatchback created space instantly, and it worked almost every single time. But the craziest part about 2K18 wasn't even a glitch. It was the console that you were using. This year, the game lagged so bad, and it had nothing to do with your Wi-Fi. It was 2K itself, and instead of fixing the servers, the only fix for this was buying a PS4 Pro, because that was the only console that didn't lag. Imagine needing a new console just to have a chance in park. That's how wild 2K18 was. And between snatchbacks and needing a PS4 Pro, just to even play the game normally, 2K18 had a level of cheese that on top of terrible microtransactions, made this feel like one of the worst 2Ks ever made. And that brings us to 2K19. If you didn't play 2K19, it had one of the cheesiest things we've ever seen in 2K, and that was pushing. All you had to do was walk behind somebody, double tap B or circle, and your player would full on shove them across the court, or even worse, throw them down. Literally just give them a two-handed shove straight to the back, and that knocked them out of the play completely. And on the twos court, forget setting a screen, because their teammate could just come up and push you out of the way. You could clamp somebody perfectly, read every move, none of it mattered. One shove and the entire possession was over. It was probably the cheesiest thing to ever be in a 2K game, because it was unguardable and the shove was basically a free bucket every time it happened. Thankfully, it was eventually patched, but before that patch, it was absolute cheese.
The whole world will see this cheese.
And then came 2K20, and the biggest cheese this year was being able to dunk from the three-point line. People would catch the ball at the top of the key, run to the side of the court, tap the spin move, and their player would go into a full spin animation that launched them from the three-point line all the way to the paint for a wide open dunk. And even if you were in the paint, contact dunks were also cheese this year, so you would just get postered anyway. It looked crazy, not even close to realistic, and it didn't even make sense. But almost everyone abused it, and one thing's for sure, it was definitely cheese. And like I said, we can't forget about the contact dunks. If you had the contact dunks equipped and a decent dunk rating, you could get a contact dunk almost every single time. And the thing that made them so cheese was that it was just straight animation based. So if you got the right animations, the defender was just sucked right into it and left helpless. Overall, 2K20 was one of the last great 2Ks, and maybe that's because it was filled with so much cheese. That brings us to 2K21. This year, there were still plenty of chaotic moments, especially with experiments like Rookieville, but it was also still pretty cheese. And the first one was the speed boost glitch. This wasn't some animation combo or special move. All you had to do was start a dribble animation and then instantly launched out of it way faster than the defender could react. So you'd be standing still 1 second and then just launch out of it and be full speed towards the rim. It was unfair and it gave you a free lane right to the hoop. And it was definitely super cheese.
Cheese.
And then there was 2K22, and even though people remember it for the left, right, and the walk back cheese movement, there were still a couple of things that we didn't talk about. One of the biggest ones was limitless takeoff, because in 2K22, it was one of the most overpowered badges 2K's ever made. If someone had this on Gold or Hall of Fame, they could take off way further than they were supposed to, and because of that, the dunk animation would just go straight through your contest. And along with that, there was another annoying cheese this year, and that was the quick drops off one. That's because they were so fast and almost impossible to block, and easily one of the cleanest animations in the game. And what made it so annoying is it became the meta dunk package that everyone ran, so you saw this in almost every game you played. And another cheesy thing that doesn't get talked about, that's been in 2K forever, and that was the timeout cheese on your teammates. If you weren't passing the ball to somebody, if you got somebody mad, or if they just wanted to troll, you'd get a clean steal, go for a wide open dunk, and then boom, timeout. I added it to 2K22 because this year I feel like it happened more consistently, but that being said, it still happens in today's games, and it's easily one of the most toxic cheese things that you could ever do. Overall, 2K22 wasn't horrible, but it also wasn't great. This year still had plenty of cheese. Next up, we have 2K23, and in this game, there's still a lot of cheese that we didn't mention in part 1. I'm not talking about a cool combo to cross somebody over. I'm talking about when people would spam the same move over and over again to the point where their player literally would stop dribbling, and instead, they would just start sliding towards the hoop. It took absolutely no skill, and it was honestly just hilarious watching a player just sliding across the court without even needing to dribble. And on top of that, you also had the scoop layup cheese, and this was the meta. The animation would launch you forward, wrap around any contest, and go in even if the defender was right there. It was insanely broken and easily one of the cheesiest finishing moves in this entire game. 2K23 wasn't great, but these things alone made every game nothing but cheese. And that leads us into 2K24. 2K24 still had a good amount of cheese, and one of the biggest ones I didn't mention this year was the Jamal Murray behind the back, because this move was everywhere. Guards would spam it over and over, and the animation gave you way more space than it should have. You'd try to cut it off, and your defender would just slide right out of position, and that would lead to the offensive player getting a wide open jumper. But the cheese didn't stop there, because they also had the dunk meter. If someone knew how to time it, they were getting a contact dunk almost every single time. It didn't matter who was under the rim. If the meter popped up, you were getting postered while seeing a green animation. There was nothing you could do besides sit back and just let it happen. But the funniest cheese this year, that came from 2K themselves, because if you hung on the rim after your player tried to dunk, the player would sometimes glitch out and just start spinning in circles in midair while still holding onto the rim. So your player would just be swinging like a helicopter while everyone on the court just watched and laughed. And it's easily one of the funniest things 2K's ever had, but if you were trying to play defense, this was definitely some cheese. And then we had 2K25, and in part 1 I covered most of the cheese in 2K25, but one huge thing I didn't mention was L2 cheese. It was especially bad on the 2's court because teams would just run a 99 strength center whose only job was to just clip the defender with L2. So he'd just sit there, hold L2, bump into you, and completely block you from contesting the shot at all. So all you saw all game was a whole bunch of wide open greens. And if you played 2's this year, you know exactly how annoying this was. And 2K25 had plenty of cheese, but L2 was easily one of the worst. And that brings us to the most recent game, 2K26. 2K26 is definitely one of the cheesiest 2Ks we've had in years. In the beginning, the main cheese was the 7-4 builds. They were so tall, and the contest system was so broken, so you couldn't even guard their shot. So even if they were covered in 4 people, the shot would still be open, which made absolutely no sense. And then before the patch, the fading cheese absolutely broke this game, because every moving shot was going in, and it seemed like defense was just non-existent. And to a certain extent, it still does. But the one cheese in 2K that just seems unpatchable, that's the Zens, because at this point, almost everyone has one, and if you don't, you're at a disadvantage. And 2K claims they want a skill gap, but when Zens exist and you refuse to fix the issue, it just honestly makes it look like 2K doesn't care. Overall, 2K26 is one of the cheesiest 2Ks we've ever seen, and in the beginning, it was honestly one of the most fun. And although some players still enjoy it, it'll ultimately just go down as another cheesy year of NBA 2K. And that is the history of 2K Cheese Volume 2. Let's be honest, this video could have easily been 10 hours long, but I tried my best to cover the main points over part 1 and 2. And with that being said, as always, thank you for watching. If you want to show some love, leave a like and subscribe. I appreciate all of you. And remember, no matter what,
stay saucy.
Ever since I can remember, I've been popping my collar.